So I've been sitting here for like 5 minutes trying to figure out how to start this video, and it's a tricky one because at the end of the day, Shimano is being a dick. And as a result, you as a consumer are basically getting hosed for it. And especially if you are a Hammerhead Karoo user, though I don't think this is going to be limited to just Hammerhead, at least not now. I think this is probably just a bit of the start of what's going to happen over the next little while. So in a nutshell, starting next Thursday on June 2nd, Hammerhead will be rolling out a software update that removes all Di2 functionality from the Hammerhead Karoo series. This is at the request/actual demand from Shimano that says that they are no longer allowed to use that functionality. Now, the fact that there's even like a way for Shimano to demand that is probably the more interesting story here. Now, before we get into all the nuance of this, here is the exact quote from Hammerhead about this whole kerfuffle. They say that the changes come at the request of Shimano. Shimano provided a license agreement whereby Hammerhead was granted permission, along with the technical details enabling the connecting of the Hammerhead devices with the Di2 system. Hammerhead offered to continue supporting Di2 users with full functionality after the SRAM acquisition, but ultimately, Shimano identified SRAM as a competitor and the contract was terminated at Shimano's request. So the thing to understand here is that back earlier this year, SRAM bought Hammerhead. So SRAM, of course, makes group sets just like this one here. This one is the Dura-Ace R9200 group set, the latest Dura-Ace group set from Shimano. But SRAM, of course, makes their own group sets like on the one on my bike right over there. Starting next week, Hammerhead users lose all Di2 functionality. That includes battery status, gear indicators, page changes via the Di2 hood buttons, shifter modes, all that stuff, that all goes away immediately with that software update. Now, of course, you could decline the software update, but eventually, of course, you won't get new features from Hammerhead, and so it's kind of like a you lose either way sort of situation. Now, Hammerhead has had this functionality in the Karoo for almost 3 years now. Back on October 15th, 2019, they sent out a press release announcing this new functionality, and of course, it largely matched what was out there already with Garmin and Wahoo and plenty of other companies. That's because Shimano has long licensed their Di2 compatibility integration with all sorts of companies. In fact, here is Shimano's own website showing their Di2 partners from the Internet Wayback Machine of roughly a year ago, so May 5th, 2021, listed Hammerhead on there, along with countless other companies. And about now, you may be wondering, why is it that Hammerhead needs Shimano's permission to do this? Isn't this just like an industry standard? And the answer to that is unfortunately no. This is like one of the weird quirks in the entire ANT/Bluetooth/ANT Plus realm. And the key thing to understand here is that the Shimano Di2 system is not actually ANT Plus. It is what's called private ANT. So ANT, in the grand scheme of things, there's always kind of two parts to it. There's ANT Plus, so that's things like heart rate sensors and power meters and running foot pods, your ANT Plus FEC trainer. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of open standard ANT Plus profiles. However, there are also things that companies can leverage the ANT wireless communications for that are not ANT Plus. For example, way back in the day, Fitbit's first Fitbit was actually on ANT. It's not very well known. And when Garmin often in the past has released new products, for example, Cycling Dynamics for Vector, that starts off as private ANT and then eventually transitions to a public ANT Plus profile. So we saw Garmin years ago initially launch the Cycling Dynamics portion of their Vector power meter on a private profile, but eventually that became the Cycling Dynamics public ANT Plus profile. The same is true for public ANT Plus running dynamics. The same is true for the public ANT Plus cycling Varia radar profile, or not just called radar profile. Those are all public profiles that start off on the private side of things. But Shimano never actually transitioned to the public profile. So years ago when Shimano first partnered with Garmin to show all your gearing information and battery information and all that kind of goodness on your Garmin, that was using basically a private profile, because back in the day there was no ANT Plus gearing profile yet. No big deal though, because a lot of profiles start off private until there's more interest from other companies, and then eventually they become public. Unfortunately, that never happened. In the case of ANT Plus, SRAM came along and Campagnolo came along. They created the ANT Plus gear shifting profile. That's now supported on countless bike computers as well as SRAM and Campagnolo. The assumption that was always that Shimano would eventually move over from their private implementation to the public standard. The two implementations were almost identical in a lot of ways, and so it wouldn't have been a big lift. But the thing is, the fact that Shimano never got around to supporting the public profile wasn't really a huge deal in the industry. They basically gave the licensing and technical agreement agreements to everyone without any sort of big deal. So it was like, fine, it works here, and we'll just move on to more important stuff. That's of course until today, when Shimano has revoked that licensing agreement from SRAM because they view SRAM as a competitor, which of course they are, but that's sort of the magic of open standards, is that companies that are competitors can work together. And this has worked exceptionally well in the cycling industry over the last decade plus, especially with ANT Plus and even Bluetooth Smart as well. It's why you can use your bike computer with any hardware you want, any sensor you want, and it just works seamlessly. Almost every single time, for the most part, it works seamlessly because of those standards. But we've seen that start to crumble over the last couple of years, partly because the ANT Plus Symposium is not happening, so all those competitor companies aren't working together as closely anymore, and partly because companies just want to see what they can get away with. But ultimately, the losers here are actually you and me as consumers. Sure, Hammerhead and SRAM will lose a little bit from people that, aren't going to buy this device anymore, but the bulk of the near-term losers are people that bought a Shimano-equipped bike, people that went onto Shimano's website and saw the logos there and saw the Hammerhead logo on Shimano's website as a registered partner and a compliant partner with Di2, and now that's being pulled out from underneath them. And in many ways, this bike and me are like the perfect example of this. This is the Cannondale Synapse, and it's got like an integrated battery system for powering all the things. So there's lights up there that are above the camera you can't see. There's a radar and tail light up here that are again above the camera that you can't see, powered by this battery right here, and it's all like magical. It works together, has an app, it connects to like any, head unit you want. It is super, super cool. And this, of course, is just a loaner bike that I'm testing out, just like every other loaner bike that kind of comes through here. And I try lots of bikes, but this is the first bike I actually have considered buying, and may in fact buy, until now. The problem is that this bike is only configurable with Di2 and Dura-Ace on there. I can't configure it with anything else. So as a result of that, I am now effectively stuck with Di2. And I've liked the Di2 on there. It's been working great with the Hammerhead Karoo 2 over the last couple months, which is exactly how I've been using it over these last couple months. But for my job and what I do here on this channel and what I do, on the site, I need compatibility across platforms. But if this is the start of Shimano cutting off these different partners, then I'm certainly not going to go out and buy a piece of hardware, buy a bike that won't work with all the products that I have to review. But I think that's also just like you. If you're going to go out and buy a bike and you're going to look at this and go, you know what? I don't know if Shimano is going to cut off someone else next. What if they say Wahoo is a competitor? After all, Wahoo makes power meters and Shimano makes power meters. Or what if they even go after Garmin and say, hey, you know what? Garmin makes power meters, therefore no more information on a Garmin unit. Now, of course, they probably won't go after Garmin because they'll lose that battle, but they could go pick off smaller players again like Wahoo and the rest of the companies on the list there if they view them as competitors. And thus, no matter how good Di2 may be and how good this entire drivetrain and setup may be, and it is very, very good, I'm going to vote with my money. I'm going to put my money on companies that are supporting open standards and supporting interoperability across devices that I have yet to buy 1 or 2 years down the road. I want that flexibility as not just a reviewer, but as a consumer. Hope you found this interesting. If so, you know what to do on the buttons and all that kind of stuff. Have a good one.